Every working morning in Mumbai, a steel cylinder leaves a kitchen. It is about the size of a thermos. 3 tiers, sometimes 4, clipped shut with a wire clasp. Inside it is rice, a vegetable, dal, 2 flatbreads folded against the lid. It was cooked 40 minutes ago. It is still hot. That cylinder will now travel 60 kilometres. It will cross a city of more than 20 million people. It will change hands 6 times. It will ride a train, a bicycle, a wooden crate, and a man's head. And at 12:30, it will be set down on one specific desk, on one specific floor, of one specific building, in front of one specific person. Nobody involved in moving it can tell you that person's address. Most of the men who carry it left school around the 8th standard, some earlier. There is no barcode on the box. There is no tracking number. Nobody scans it. Nobody signs for it. There is no dispatcher, no control room, no manager watching a screen. For most of its journey, the box is not even in the hands of the man who picked it up. And it arrives. Not usually, not most of the time. It arrives with a reliability that has been studied at Harvard, filmed by the BBC, and copied, unsuccessfully, by logistics companies with satellite fleets and 11-figure balance sheets. Both of these things are true at once. This is one of the most accurate physical routing networks anyone has ever built. And it was built by men who could not have written down the routes. The obvious explanation is that they have some secret, a hidden system, a method that the rest of the world has failed to notice. A professor from Harvard Business School spent 6 months looking for exactly that. He flew back and forth between Boston and Mumbai. He watched the sorting. He timed the handovers. He was hunting for the operating system, the clever piece of process design that had to be in there somewhere doing the work. He did not find one, because there isn't one. What is actually holding this together is not a trick and not a talent. It is 3 ordinary things arranged in a particular order in a city shaped in a particular way. Take away any one of them and the whole thing stops inside a single lunch hour. So what is it actually running on? They are called dabbawalas. The word is almost boringly literal. A dabba is a box. A wala is the one who handles it, the one with the box. The number that made them famous is 200,000. 200,000 lunches collected from homes across Mumbai every morning, delivered to offices by lunchtime, and carried back again the same afternoon. That figure has been printed in newspapers on 5 continents. It has been read out at business conferences in Dubai and Tokyo and London. It appears on the association's own materials. It is also the first thing in this story that does not survive close inspection. Hold that. We will come back to it, because where that number came from turns out to explain more about this network than the number itself ever did. Start instead with what is not in dispute. 6 days a week, the network moves a large number of visually identical objects in 2 directions inside a fixed window across a city where the roads do not reliably work. A single box changes hands at least 5 times on the way out and the same again on the way back. Which means each lunch is not one delivery. It is a round trip with 10 separate points at which it could go wrong. Multiply that by the volume, and you are looking at hundreds of thousands of individual transfers in a single working day. Each one performed by hand. Each one performed under time pressure. Each one performed without a receipt. And the window is not generous. The food is cooked fresh. That is the entire point of the service. It exists because a hot home meal is worth something that a cold packed one is not. Fresh food has a shelf life measured in hours. Cooked at 8, it needs to be eaten by 1. Everything the network does has to happen inside that gap. Collection starts at 9. Delivery is complete by 12:30. 3.5 hours end to end for a box that may have started 40 kilometers from where it finishes. There is no slack in that. There is no buffer day. There is no next day option. A dubber that arrives at 2 o'clock has not been delivered late. It has failed because the person it belongs to has already eaten something else. Which raises the question this whole system answers. How do you build a network that cannot afford to be slow, cannot afford to be wrong, and cannot afford to be expensive, and then staff it with people who cannot read? The answer starts at the far end of the line, in the last hour before the machine switches on. Virar sits at the northern edge of the Mumbai suburban rail network, on the Western Line. From here to Churchgate, at the southern tip of the city, is around 60 kilometers of track. That is not a commute. That is a distance that would, in most cities, be a journey between two different towns. In Mumbai, it is the daily geometry of ordinary life. People sleep in Virar and Nalasopara and Vasai, and they work in Fort and Nariman Point and Ballard Estate. And every weekday morning, the entire population of a small country moves from one end of that line to the other. The trains carry something in the region of 7.5 million passengers a day. At peak hour, the loading on some sections runs at several times what the carriages were designed to hold. There are stretches where the doors are not closed because they cannot be closed. Into that, at around 9 in the morning, walks a man with a bicycle. The bicycle is not a normal bicycle. The carrier over the rear wheel has been reinforced with extra iron, because it will be asked to hold a load that would fold a standard frame. He will hang boxes from the handlebars. He will hang boxes from the crossbar. On a full round, he may be moving 30 of them, sometimes closer to 40. His territory is small. A cluster of buildings, a set of lanes, a few hundred meters in each direction. He has worked it for years. He knows which gates stick. He knows which watchman lets him through the service entrance and which one does not. He knows that the family on the 4th floor of the building with the blue water tank runs 10 minutes late on Tuesdays. Most of these buildings have no lift. The ones that do have a lift often have a lift that is reserved for residents. So he climbs. 4 floors, 5 floors, 6. He collects a box at the door. It is handed over by whoever cooked it, usually without a word, because both parties have done this several thousand times and there is nothing left to say about it. He goes back down. He hangs it on the frame. He climbs the next one. By the time the round is finished, it is 10:30 and he has covered a few kilometers on foot, vertically, carrying steel. None of these boxes are going where he is going. He is not delivering any of them. He does not know the offices they are bound for, and in most cases, he will never see them again after the next 20 minutes. This is the first thing that separates this network from every delivery service that has tried to imitate it. A courier takes a parcel from A to B. One person, one journey, one point of accountability. It is simple to understand and simple to audit, and it does not scale into a city like this, because a single courier crossing 60 kilometers of Mumbai at rush hour is a courier who arrives at 3 in the afternoon. The Dabawala does not travel with the box. He travels with a piece of the box's journey. He owns 4 kilometers of a 60-kilometer route, and he owns it completely, and then he lets go. Which means that at some point, a man who has never met the customer, never seen the building, and never been told the address, has to make the correct decision about where a steel cylinder goes. He makes it in under 2 seconds. And he makes it by looking at the lid. On the top of every dabba there is a mark. It is not a label. It is not printed. It is painted or scratched or stuck on, in a mix of colored symbols, letters and numbers, and to an outsider, it looks like graffiti. A stranger looking at it sees noise. A dabbawala looking at it sees a route. The mark carries about 4 pieces of information: a color or symbol for the collection area the box came from, a letter for the pickup point inside that area, a numeral for the destination station, and a final group of digits for the building and the floor. That is the whole system. 4 fields, no words. And here is the part that took a century of practice to arrive at, and that no software company imitating it has managed to reproduce. At no point does anyone read all 4. The man collecting in Virar only needs the origin field, because his only job is to prove the box belongs on his round. The man sorting at the origin station only needs the destination station numeral, because his only job is to get the box onto the correct train in the correct crate. The man sorting at the destination only needs the building group. The man doing the final delivery only needs the last digits, the floor. Each stage reads 1 field and ignores the rest. This is why literacy is not the bottleneck it should be. Nobody is being asked to read an address. They are being asked to match a symbol against a crate, a task closer to sorting cards than to reading a letter. And it is why the training period is measured in months rather than weeks. What takes 3 months to learn is not the code. The code could be taught in an afternoon. What takes 3 months is the map underneath it. Which numeral belongs to which station? Which building group sits behind which numeral? Which of the 14 towers in a block takes which suffix? The code is a compression of a city that the men already hold in their heads. Compress a city into 4 fields and you get something strange. The system becomes self-repairing. If a box ends up somewhere it should not be, dropped, misplaced, left behind on a platform, any dabbawala in the network can pick it up, read 1 field, and put it back on the correct path. He does not need to know where it started. He does not need to know who it belongs to. He does not need to contact anyone. The box carries its own instructions, and the instructions are legible to 5,000 people at once. A parcel with a printed address is helpless without the person holding it. A dabba is not. Lose it, and it can find its own way back into the current. Which is a kind of redundancy that costs nothing to build and cannot be switched off. The place where all of this becomes visible is Dadar. Dadar is where the Western Line and the Central Line come close enough to touch. It is the hinge of the whole city. The point where a person travelling down one spine can cross to the other, and the point where the northern suburbs stop being separate corridors and start being one network. For the Dabbawalas, it is the great sorting floor. Sometime after 10, the men who have finished their collection rounds converge on the platform. They arrive from 6 directions with loaded bicycles, and within a few minutes, the ground in front of them is covered in steel. What happens next has been filmed hundreds of times, and it still does not look plausible. A few dozen men stand in a rough circle. The boxes go down in a mass, and then they begin moving. Not carefully, not one at a time, but at the speed of a card dealer. Each man reaching, glancing, and flicking a box sideways into a crate. There is no supervisor. Nobody is calling out instructions. Nobody is checking anyone else's work. The sorting is done in a matter of minutes, because it has to be. The train that matters is not waiting. And this is the pressure that shapes everything upstream. The collection round does not finish at 10:30, because 10:30 is a convenient time. It finishes then because a specific train leaves shortly afterwards. And everything that is not in a crate when it leaves is not going anywhere. which means the deadline at Dadar is not set by the Dabbawalas. It is set by a railway timetable that they have no influence over whatsoever. Hold that too. It becomes the whole story later. The crates themselves are worth looking at, because they are one of the quiet reasons this works. They are wooden, rectangular, long, open at the top. A full one holds up to around 150 boxes, and when it is loaded, it takes 3 or 4 men to lift it. In the high-density destination areas, Nariman Point, Fort, the streets around the old business district, a crate is dedicated to a single zone, so that an entire district's lunch travels as one object. That is a batching decision, and it is the reason the network can move a large volume with a small number of people. Nobody is carrying 200,000 items. They are carrying a few thousand crates. The item count only reappears at the very last stage, in the final few hundred meters, where it has to. The other quiet decision is the box itself. Dabbas are standardized, roughly the same diameter, roughly the same height, roughly the same clasp. Not because anyone issued a regulation, but because 130 years of use has selected for the shape that stacks. Variation is the enemy here. A crate that holds 150 identical cylinders holds 90 if a third of them are odd shapes. Someone bringing an unusually large box does not just inconvenience himself, he removes capacity from the entire crate, for everyone in it, for the whole day. So the system quietly refuses novelty. It is not designed to accommodate you, it is designed to accommodate the crate. By around 20 to 11, the crates are on the platform edge, and the men are waiting for a train that carries commuters and does not care about them at all. The Mumbai Suburban Railway opened in 1853, when the first line in India ran from what is now Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Terminus out towards Thane. That single fact does more to explain the Dabbawalas than anything about the Dabbawalas themselves. Mumbai is not shaped like a city, it is shaped like a corridor. The old core sits at the southern tip of a narrow peninsula, and the land runs north from it in a strip a few kilometers wide, hemmed by the Arabian Sea on one side and a creek on the other. That shape was not natural, and it was not inevitable. It was made. In the 17th and 18th centuries, this was an archipelago, a scatter of low islands and tidal flats that flooded twice a day, so that moving between them depended on the water. Then the embankments went in. The Hornby Vellard closed off the breach at Worli and stopped the sea coming through the middle. Causeways followed. Sion in 1803, Calabar in 1838, Mahim in 1845, and the gaps between the islands became roads. By the second half of the 19th century, the water in between was gone, and what had been an archipelago was one long finger of land pointing south into the sea. Everything that has happened in this city since is downstream of that shape. Because when the docks and the mills and the trading houses and the banks all settled at the southern tip, the deep end of the harbour, the place the ships came to, and the only direction the city could grow was north, the result was a metropolis with its work at one end and its housing at the other. There is no ring road solution to that. There is no distributing the traffic around a circle because there is no circle. A peninsula has one axis. Everyone travels along it, in the same direction, at the same time, twice a day, forever. Which is why the railway is not a convenience in Mumbai. It is the only mechanism that has ever made the shape of the city survivable. And in 1890, a man named Mahadeo Havaji Bache noticed something about the people riding it. They were migrants. They had come to Bombay from all over the subcontinent for work in the mills and the offices and the port, and they came from communities with different food, different grains, different spicing, different rules about what could be cooked in the same pot as what. The city's eating houses could not serve all of that and would not have tried. So these men were going to work at 7 in the morning and not eating until they got home. Bache started a service with about 100 men. The idea was not complicated. The food would be cooked at home, where it was cooked correctly, and it would follow the man to work. What he had actually found was a piece of unused capacity. The trains were already running. They were already going in exactly the right direction at exactly the right time. Nobody was using the space between the morning commuter peak and the middle of the day. The Dabbawalas did not build a transport network. They found one, empty, in the gap. And that is still the arrangement, 135 years later. The crates go into the luggage compartment, not a dedicated freight service, the goods and luggage section of a normal commuter train at the end of the rake, where the carriage is not sealed off from the platform in the way a passenger door is. Getting them in is a coordinated lift. Men from different groups who compete with each other for customers load each other's crates without discussion because the train will not hold and the loading has to be finished before it does. Then, for the first time since 9 in the morning, there is nothing to do. The compartment is one of the few places in the day where the men are simply passengers. The faces change. The tension goes out of the posture. There is conversation about the villages, about money, about who is going home for the harvest and who is not. Somebody eats. The train runs south past Borivali and Andheri and Bandra, and the crates sit on the floor between their feet. And for 40 minutes, the network is doing nothing at all except being carried. It is the only part of the operation that costs the Dabbawalas almost nothing and does almost all of the distance. At Andheri, some of them get off. The central line groups peel away at their own junctions and rejoin later. Boxes cross between corridors. A dabba that started on one line finishing on another, transferred in a scrum on a platform by men who will each handle it for less than a minute. The central line runs its own version of the same journey. It comes down from Kalyan and Dombivli and Ambernath, settlements far enough out that they were separate towns within living memory, through Thane and into Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj terminus at the southern end. Two spines converging on the same few square kilometres. Boxes from both arrive inside the same lunch hour, and groups from both meet on the same pavements. It is not the only hand network in this city that works this way. A few kilometres north, at Mahalaxmi, the open-air washing guts have taken in laundry from hotels and hospitals since 1890. The same year Bache started with his 100 men, and returned it sorted, by hand, by mark, to the right building. Mumbai has solved the same problem twice with the same answer. No technology, a code, and a fixed route walked by the same person for 20 years. A single box may change trains twice. The men do not travel with it across those changes. They hand a crate down and a different group takes it up. And both sides trust that the other did it right, because there is no mechanism by which they could check. By around 11:30, the crates are coming out at Churchgate. Outside the station, there is a stretch of pavement that becomes, for about 20 minutes every weekday, one of the densest sorting operations on the planet. The crates come down, the boxes come out, and the second great sort begins. Not by station this time, but by building. A crate that arrived holding the whole of one district is broken into the individual towers inside it, and each tower's boxes are grouped for the man who will carry them the last few hundred meters. This is the moment the count reappears. Everything before this was crates. From here, it is boxes, one at a time, and the number is suddenly very large again. The men doing this sort are not, in most cases, the men who came off the train. Another handover. Another set of hands that has never seen the customer. And the field they are reading is the last one, the group of digits nobody has needed until now. That final number is the floor. It has been sitting on the lid since Virar. Nobody looked at it for 3 hours because nobody had any use for it. It becomes the most important thing on the box in the last 90 seconds of its journey, which is the whole logic of the code in one detail. Information is not distributed to everyone who might want it. It is withheld until the exact moment it becomes actionable, and then it is handed to exactly one person. The last stage is the one that undoes everything the network has built up to this point. For 3 hours, the system has been getting more efficient. Individual boxes became crates. Crates became a single train movement. 60 kilometers were crossed by a few dozen men doing almost nothing. Now it reverses. The crate breaks into boxes. The boxes go onto handcarts and bicycles and heads. And the men fan out into the streets around Fort and Nariman Point and Ballard Estate, into buildings, into lifts that are full, into stairwells. Around 30 boxes on a wooden handcart, pushed by one man through traffic that does not stop for handcarts. The last few hundred meters consume a disproportionate share of the effort in this network, and they always will, because they are the only part that cannot be batched. Every box has to arrive somewhere different. There is no crate for that. This is the same problem that every delivery company in the world is currently spending enormous amounts of money on. The final leg is where margin goes to die. Warehouses are cheap, trunk routes are cheap, doors are expensive. The Dabbawalas solved it the only way it has ever actually been solved. They made the last mile local, and they made it permanent. The man delivering to a tower has been delivering to that tower for years. He knows the security desk. He knows which floors have a canteen and which do not. He knows the office where the receptionist takes the boxes in and distributes them, and the office where he has to walk them to the desks himself. He is not solving a routing problem. He is repeating a route he could walk unconscious. At 12:30, he sets a warm steel cylinder down beside a keyboard. The person it belongs to may not look up. It is worth being straight about what this costs the men doing it. A working day starts before 9 and finishes after 6. 6 days a week. Through summers where the temperature and the humidity together make the air feel solid, and through a monsoon that runs for 4 months. The climbing is not incidental, it is the job. Buildings without lifts, on collection and on delivery, twice a day, carrying between 8 and 40 kilograms depending on the leg. Shoulders, knees and backs take the load. For that, a Dabbawala earns in the region of 15 to 25,000 rupees a month, depending on how many boxes he handles. The customer pays somewhere between 1,500 and 2,500 rupees a month for the service, for a hot meal delivered and the empty box returned 6 days a week. The margins in this network are not thin, they are almost invisible. And they have been kept that way deliberately because the entire proposition depends on the service costing less than the alternative. There is a version of this story that gets told internationally in which the men are picturesque. The white caps, the bicycles, the tradition. That version is popular because it is comfortable, and because it lets the reliability be read as charm rather than as labor. The reliability is labor. It is several thousand people walking upstairs. At around 1 o'clock, the direction reverses. the empty boxes go back. This is the half of the operation that almost never gets photographed, and it is the half that doubles the size of the problem. Every delivery in the morning creates a collection in the afternoon. Every route run southbound has to be run northbound. The count of transactions is not 200,000, it is twice that. And the return leg is harder in one specific way. In the morning, the boxes are moving towards a small number of dense destinations, a few business districts tightly packed. In the afternoon, they are moving towards tens of thousands of individual homes spread across 60 kilometers. The morning is a funnel. The afternoon is the funnel run backwards. No delivery company would take that contract. Returns are the thing logistics businesses spend their lives trying to avoid, because a return has all of the cost of a delivery and none of the revenue. The Dabbawalas do it because it is not a return, it is the service. What the customer is buying is not lunch. Lunch is the visible part. What they are buying is the removal of a decision from their morning, the ability to cook in a kitchen at 7 and eat it at a desk at 12:30, and to find the empty box back in the kitchen by evening without anyone having carried it anywhere. Take away the return leg and the whole thing collapses into an ordinary food delivery, and it stops being worth what people pay for it. And there is a second cargo on the return trip that nobody charges for. Boxes have carried house keys, spectacles, documents, a wage packet, medicine, a note tucked under the lid from someone at home to someone at work, and the reply that comes back that evening. The Dabba became a channel because it was the only thing that made the journey twice a day, reliably, for 100 years. Which raises a question that has been sitting under all of this. Why is the man who picks the box up never the man who puts it down? The answer is not operational, it is financial, and it is the least understood part of the entire network. The Dabbawalas are not employees. There is no company. There is an association, and beneath it, something closer to 800 small, independent businesses. Each of those businesses is a group, usually somewhere between 15 and 25 men, led by senior members called muqaddams. The group finds its own customers, sets its own arrangements, keeps its own books, and divides its own money among its own members. They compete with each other. Two groups working overlapping territory are rivals for the same households. And then, every single morning, they hand each other's boxes onto trains. That is the structural trick, and it is worth stating plainly. The network is competitive at the point where customers are won, and completely cooperative at the point where boxes are moved. Nobody has to be told to help load a rival's crate, because a rival's crate that misses the train delays the train, and the train is shared. To join, a man contributes capital in kind: a pair of bicycles, a wooden crate, the white kurta, the Gandhi cap. He is not hired, he buys in, and what he buys is a share of the group's earnings. Which means there is nobody above him taking a cut for the privilege of organizing him, and there is nobody below him whose work he is skimming. The share structure is flat, and it is flat all the way up. The consequence is that supervision is unnecessary in the ordinary sense. Nobody polices the sorting floor because the men on it are not being paid a wage to be watched. They are dividing a pot, and a mistake comes out of the pot. What replaces supervision is spare capacity. Every group carries more men than the round strictly requires. Not many more, 2 or 3, but enough that on any given morning somebody can be ill, or late, or back in the village for a funeral, and the round still goes out complete. That is an expensive habit for an organization with margins this thin, and it is not sentiment. It is the only defense available. A network with a 3-hour window and no way to reschedule cannot absorb an absence by moving work to tomorrow. It has to absorb it inside the same morning, or 100 boxes do not move. Which is why every man in a group is trained on every stage: collection, sorting, loading, delivery, return. Nobody is a specialist. The men are interchangeable by design, and the code exists partly to make them so. If any field on the lid required knowledge that only one man happened to hold, the arrangement would fail the first morning he did not come. The workforce comes, and has always come, from a specific set of places: Maval and the talukas around it in Pune district, 150 kilometers inland; Junar, Ambigaon, Mulshi. These are Varkari communities, with a devotional tradition built around annual pilgrimage on foot, in disciplined groups, over long distances in the monsoon. Punctuality, endurance, and collective movement are not workplace values imported into this network. They arrived with the people. A man's son may not want the work. He often does not. He has grown up in the city, been educated further than his father, and can see the stairwells clearly enough. The Mukaddams are not especially worried by this. For every young Mumbaiker who says no, there is another young man in the villages who says yes, and arrives already knowing 4 other men in the network by name. So where does it break? 6 handovers on the way out, 6 on the way back. No tracking, no receipts, no supervisor. It is reasonable to assume that one of those 12 points is the weak one, that somewhere in the chain there is a step that fails more often than the others, and that the network's real skill is compensating for it. That assumption is wrong, and the way it is wrong is the most useful thing in this story. None of the handovers is the weak point. The handovers are the strongest part of the system. They are short, they are local, they are performed by men who have done them thousands of times, and the code makes each one a single decision with a single correct answer. What fails is underneath all of it. Every year, from around June to September, the monsoon arrives on the west coast of India, and Mumbai receives a very large amount of water in a very short time, onto a city built on filled-in tidal flats that used to drain twice a day and now cannot. The tracks flood. When the tracks flood, the trains stop or crawl. And when the trains stop, the dabawalas stop. Not slow down, stop. On the worst days, the association announces a suspension, a decision it does not take lightly, because the network's reputation is built on the fact that it does not miss. Deliveries are called off for the day. In the heaviest years, it has happened more than once in a week. And the reason given is never that the boxes cannot be sorted, or that the code has failed, or that the men will not come. The reason given is the railway. And, increasingly often, the reason given is that the men's own homes are under water. The Vasai and Virar belt, at the northern end of the line, where a large share of the workforce lives, is also one of the parts of the region that floods first and drains last. So the same water takes out the route and the people who work it on the same morning. Look at what that tells you. A network with 12 manual handovers, no technology, and a semi-literate workforce does not fail at any of the places you would expect. It fails at the one place it has no control over at all. Which means the fragility was never in the dabawalas. It was in the thing they borrowed. And now the number. 200,000 lunches. 1 error in 6 million deliveries. A 6 Sigma certification awarded by Forbes magazine in 1998. Almost none of that is quite true, and the story of how it became true anyway is a small masterpiece of how the world decides what it knows. Forbes did publish an article about the dabawalas in 1998. It was admiring, and it was accurate about what it actually described. It did not award a certification, because magazines do not award certifications. And its lead author, Subrata Chakravarti, later stated directly that he never used the term Six Sigma at all, that it is a process, not a statistic, and that the confusion came from a number people associate with it. The error ratio has a similarly ordinary origin. It traces back to an estimate given by Raghunath Medj, long-serving president of the association, when he was asked how often things went wrong. He gave a figure. It was an answer to a question, not the output of a study. Then, at a conference some years later, a reporter asked whether the Dabbawalas were a Six Sigma organization. The reply was, in effect, that if that meant a certain error rate, then yes, and Forbes had said so. Forbes had not said so. Nobody checked. The story was filed. After that, it stopped being a claim and became a fact. It was reprinted, cited, presented in lecture theatres, put into case studies, and eventually printed by the association itself, because by then the world had been telling them what they were for long enough that it would have been strange to argue. The volume figure went the same way. 200,000 became the standard number in the international press. Harvard's own case study, examining the same network in the same period, worked with a figure closer to 130,000. Both numbers were published, side by side, for years. Nobody reconciled them because nobody needed to. The story worked either way. And it is worth being careful here, because there is a cheap version of this correction, and it is not the one that matters. The cheap version says, the Dabbawalas were overrated, the myth was inflated, the miracle was smaller than advertised. The useful version says something else. It says that for 25 years, the most repeated fact about one of the most studied logistics networks on Earth was a number nobody had measured, and that this did not matter in the slightest because the thing the number was pointing at was real. The network genuinely is extremely accurate. It genuinely does move an enormous volume by hand inside a 3-hour window. Those things did not need a certificate, and they were never what the certificate was about. What the myth did was change the question. Once the world had decided this was a miracle of quality management, everyone who came to look came looking for a management secret. A process, a discipline, a hidden methodology. Consultants arrived, logistics companies arrived. A Harvard professor spent 6 months looking for the operating system. And all of them were looking in the wrong place, because the answer was not inside the organization. It was in the shape of the city and in a timetable that belongs to someone else. For 100 years, this network had one enormous advantage that it did not earn and never had to think about. Everybody was going to the same place. When the work of the city sat at the southern tip, the docks, the mills, the exchanges, the head offices, the government buildings, the flow was a single arrow. North to south in the morning, south to north in the evening. 60 kilometers of track, one destination cluster at the end of it, and a handful of stations that mattered. That is an almost perfect shape for a batching network. It is why a crate can hold one district. It is why sorting has only 2 stages. It is why the whole thing can be done by hand. That shape has been coming apart for 30 years. The mills at Lower Parel closed, and the land under them became offices and towers, and a business district appeared 5 kilometers north of the old one. Bandra Kurla complex was built on reclaimed marsh beside the Mithi River, and the banks and the consulates and the corporate headquarters began moving into it. Andheri filled with offices, then Goregaon, Malad, Powai, and the corridor out towards Thane and Navi Mumbai. Nariman Point, which was the reason the arrow pointed south, is no longer the center of anything except its own history. And a network built to serve one endpoint now faces a dozen. Some of the new districts are simply hostile to this method. Bandra Kurla complex is a case study in it. A large employment centre with poor rail access by Mumbai standards, reached mainly by road, laid out at a scale that assumes a car. A dabbawala arriving at the nearest station is still a long way from the desk. The batching maths breaks immediately. 12 destination clusters instead of 1 means 12 times the sorting, thinner crates, longer last miles, and more men to move the same number of boxes. The city's answer to its own congestion has been to go underground. A metro line now runs beneath South Mumbai, along a corridor where the surface cannot take anything more. It carries people, it does not carry crates. A commuter train's luggage compartment is a 19th century affordance that survived into the 21st because nobody ever removed it. A modern metro carriage has no equivalent. No goods section, no floor for a wooden box holding 150 dabbas. No tolerance for 4 men lifting one in during a 30-second stop. The newest spine in Mumbai is faster, cleaner, and better engineered than the old one. The dabbawalas cannot use it. The network has absorbed a great deal of this. It has added groups, redrawn territories, run new corridors. What it cannot do is change the geometry it was optimized for. Which brings all of it to one place, at 12:20, outside a tower in Fort. The box that left a kitchen in Virar at 9 o'clock this morning is now in a man's hand, about 4 minutes from a desk. Count what had to happen for it to be here. A woman finished cooking and clipped a lid shut at a particular minute, because a particular man arrives at a particular time. He climbed 5 floors and carried it down. He hung it on a reinforced bicycle with 29 others and rode to a station. Men from 6 directions put their boxes on the ground together and sorted them by one field in a few minutes flat. A wooden crate holding 150 of them was lifted into a luggage compartment by men from rival groups. It travelled 60 kilometres with nobody doing anything to it. It came out onto a pavement and was broken down by building. It was carried on a head, then a handcart, then up a stairwell. 12 pairs of hands. Not one of them knew the name of the person at the end. And every single one of those steps was timed against something none of them own. This is what the network is actually running on. It has no clock of its own. There is no schedule that the association writes, no timetable that the macadams agree, no target time issued to anyone. The men do not work to a plan. They work to a train. The collection round ends when it ends because a specific service departs shortly afterwards. The sorting at Dadar takes the number of minutes it takes because that is how long there is. The transfer at Andheri happens in the window between 2 arrivals. The pavement sort at Churchgate begins the moment the crates come off and finishes before the boxes go cold, because the train arrived when the railway said it would. Indian Railways runs a commuter service for 7.5 million passengers a day and has no relationship with the dabbawalas beyond selling them tickets and letting them use the luggage compartment. It does not know it is doing this. It publishes a timetable for its own reasons. And 135 years of food delivery has been hung off it like a coat on a nail. That is why there are no managers. A manager's core function is to synchronize people who would otherwise drift out of step with each other, to impose a shared clock on a group that has none. This network already has one. It is loud, it is public, it arrives on a platform, and it does not negotiate. 5,000 men do not need to be coordinated if all 5,000 are answering to the same departure. It is also why the code can be so simple. A code only has to carry the information that the clock does not. The timetable handles when. The peninsula handles where. In the large sense, everything is on one axis, so there are no branching route decisions to encode. All that is left for the lid is which one, and that fits in 4 fields. Take away the shape, and the code needs more fields. Take away the timetable, and there is no synchronization at all. 5,000 independent men in 800 competing businesses arriving at platforms at times of their own choosing with no way to find each other. The whole apparatus is a set of behaviours precisely fitted to a railway schedule and a strip of reclaimed land. Nothing about it is portable. It has been tried in other Indian cities, and it has never worked the same way, because no other city is this shape. At 24 minutes past 12, a warm steel cylinder is set down beside a keyboard on the 7th floor. The last field on the lid, the digits nobody needed for 3 hours, was the 7. The system has survived a great deal. It has survived floods that shut the tracks and riots that shut the streets. It has survived the arrival of the office canteen, the fast food chain, the vending machine, the packed sandwich. It has survived every consultant who arrived to modernise it, and every logistics company that came to study it and went home without a transferable lesson. It did not survive the desk being empty. When the offices closed in 2020, nothing in the network failed. The code still worked. The men were still there. The trains were still running, eventually. Every mechanism this documentary has described was intact and functioning. There was simply nowhere to deliver to. At the low point, the workforce fell to around 1,500 men. Many went back to the villages in Pune district. A large number did not come back at all. They had found other work, or the work had found them, and the calculation of whether to return to the stairwells had changed. The association's own figures tell the rest of it plainly. A workforce of roughly 5,000 before the pandemic is now somewhere around 3,000. And the daily volume, the 200,000 that made this network famous, that was printed on 5 continents, that was never quite the measured figure anyway, is now given by the association as more than 50,000. The machinery did not shrink. The demand for it did. Some of that is hybrid work, which removes not the customer, but 3 of their 5 days. Some of it is the delivery apps, which cannot bring a meal from a customer's own kitchen, but can bring one from somebody else's, and which arrive in 20 minutes rather than 3.5 hours. Some of it is a generation that grew up ordering food on a phone and has no particular attachment to a steel box. And some of it is simply the shape. The arrow that pointed south for 100 years now points in a dozen directions at once, and a system built on everybody going to the same place cannot follow everybody to different ones. The men are not defeated about it. The association has said publicly that it expects the numbers to recover. New customers still arrive the old way. Someone sees the white cap on a street, asks a question, and is signed up by a mukaddam who walks the route once himself to check the address. But the thing that is being tested now is not the network's accuracy, and it never was. Accuracy was never the achievement. The achievement was fit. A set of human habits shaped so exactly to a railway timetable and a peninsula that the two became indistinguishable from each other. Fit is a strength, right up until the thing you are fitted to moves. At around 6 in the evening, an empty steel cylinder is set back down on a kitchen counter in Virar. Nobody photographs this part. There is no crate for it, no famous number attached to it, no case study. It is just the second half of a round trip, performed by a different set of hands than the ones that took it away, arriving quietly at a door that has been expecting it for years. Tomorrow morning it will be full again, and at 9 o'clock a man with a reinforced bicycle will climb 5 floors to collect it, and the whole apparatus will assemble itself around a departure time that nobody in it decided. For how many more mornings, and to how many desks, is not a question the Dabbawalas can answer. It was never theirs to answer. They have always been passengers on somebody else's schedule, and the schedule is still running. What has changed is the number of people waiting at the other end. Thanks for watching. Until the next journey.